In Vedanta, everything is consciousness. But then the question is, well, if everything is consciousness, does that mean everything is conscious to some degree? And some people argue that people like Mayor Baba, I think, argued that even a rock is conscious in some way. And then as you go up the evolutionary chain, consciousness gets reflected with more and more fullness and complexity.
Yes, that distinction is important. At least to begin with, we should make the distinction that even if Advaita Vedanta claims that everything, it is all-pervasive consciousness, so in some sense there's consciousness in everything, it does not claim that everything is conscious. The difference is between the presence and absence of what Vedanta calls reflected consciousness. And reflected consciousness is exactly the kind of consciousness with which we are familiar in our own minds, in our own experience. Right now, I'm conscious and you are conscious too. And this consciousness which we feel, which gives us subjective experience of sensory experience, of thinking, of feeling, of memory, of a self, all of this is what is called, it's due to reflected consciousness. And this reflected consciousness requires the presence of a mind, which is a part of what Advaita Vedanta calls a subtle body, Sukshma Sharira in Sanskrit. So all these physical things, they may be called, they're physical entities, but they don't become a body until there is an indwelling subtle body, which makes it a sentient being. The moment there's a subtle body, a mind, then there is reflected consciousness. And then you would call it a sentient being. Otherwise, rocks and planets and stars, consciousness is there in a very absolute sense, in the sense that they exist, in that sense alone. But they are not conscious beings like us. So this is the difference. And this makes all the difference between you and the table chair you are sitting on. The physical body is living body, and a living body supports a mind, and the mind supports this reflected consciousness. It's like, to give an entirely different example, the sun and the moon at night, the sky would be all dark, even though sunlight is spread across space, but we would not see it unless the moon were there to reflect that sunlight. And then you see the moon glowing with moonlight. So if the moon was not there, there would still be sunlight, but it would look like dark space, and nothing would be visible. Similarly, without a reflected consciousness, it would just be a physical entity, a material entity, which we look out and see these entities. There is no inner being there. There is no inner consciousness there.
I think some would argue, though, just to pursue this a little bit further, that since there is a subtle level of everything as well as its grossest manifestation, such as Mount Arunachala, for instance, there's a subtle level to it. Perhaps even though it's inanimate on the gross level, on the subtle level, perhaps there could be an indwelling entity of some sort that occupies that mountain as its abode, as Ramana seemed to think, or Mount Kailash in Tibet or whatever. And in that case, it's not like the mountain is conscious, but there's a consciousness, and not just pure consciousness, but some impulse of consciousness indwelling in many, many things, if not all.
That's certainly the Hindu belief. So,
Right.
for example, because consciousness is all pervasive, in some places you would find consciousness identified with what would seem to be a physical body, say like the sun. You mentioned the sun earlier. The Surya, from the Vedic perspective, its consciousness is just like, here is consciousness with the Swami's body. There is consciousness with the body of the sun. So there is a conscious being behind the sun, which is, I'm not saying that it's a general all-pervasive Brahman, but these are the deities which the Vedic rishis would worship, pray to. So that kind of thing is there. It's a bit like, I would say, I'll give another example, our dreams. So in our dreams, everything in the dream, every entity in the dream, living and non-living in the dream, is actually our mind. Our mind has produced all of them, or is appearing as all of them. Now in our dream, there could be a human being, a dog, and a rock, or a wooden table. So in one sense, the wooden table or rock is non-living, non-conscious, and the dog and the human being is conscious. Yes, and for all purposes in the dream, that's what it would appear like. But we know a deeper truth is that there is the dreamer's mind underlying all of them. And it's basically all mind. Yeah, in that sense.